So hi everybody and welcome to the webinar. I'm Vicki Dill. I'm one of the volunteers for the IDL SIG, and today we have a treat for you. Dr. Jennifer Goode is recreating her very, very popular Can You Hear Me Now podcast as a teaching and communications tools session. It was super popular at the summit. Not all of us got to see it, and the people that did get to see it were really reaching out to me and saying, you've got to get Jennifer to do this as a webinar because it's really good material and we should all hear about it. And so when I approached Dr. Goode, she said yes, that she would be glad to. And so we are so delighted and pretty excited. I got to see a preview of some of the slides, and we've got some really good information coming our way. And so without further ado, Jennifer Goode.
Hey, thanks, Vicki. Thanks so much for the SIG for having me on. This is a great opportunity, and I'm glad to have you guys here joining me virtually or even after the fact. I know schedules can get discombobulated from time to time and things come up, so I appreciate the time you're taking out of your busy day and your schedule to join us. I'm going to stop sharing my webcam and jump over to my slides now. So you should see my slides. Yeah, and I see some familiar faces on here from the folks that joined me at the summit, so I'm so pleased to reconnect here online and to work with you again. It's good to see you guys. Well, I'm gonna have you guys chime in as well throughout the session. If you have any questions, you're confused, you want me to go over something, jump in. I'm monitoring chat, and Vicki's got my backup, she assures me. So she's going to chime in as well if she sees some comments or questions that need to be asked, because I want to make sure that this session is useful to you. I'm going to talk a little bit about podcasts. We're going to do a slight overview of it, just in case you're not real familiar with podcasts. And then we're going to get a little bit into more specifics with how either organizations and businesses can use podcasts, or how you can use them in an academic setting for teaching and learning. So I hope one of those situations is at least a little bit interesting to you and maybe useful in your work, and hopefully you walk away with some inspiration for using or applying or just listening to podcasts as you work on developing yourself, your organization, your team members, your students, or any other aspect of your life. So glad you're here, and let's go ahead and jump in. First, I want to say that I apologize. It was totally my fault that we had to reschedule last week. You see, we had a little thing last week, and I was literally under the weather. I don't know if you've heard about it, but Hurricane Michael hit last week, and that put us at a Category 1 hurricane here in Macon, Georgia. One of the reasons I don't live at the coast is because I don't want to be bothered by hurricanes, and here we are in central Georgia, the place where most people flee to in order to get away from storms. We encountered a Category 1 hurricane last week. I couldn't believe it. And of course it was set to hit in the middle of the night on Wednesday night, scheduled to make landfall earlier that afternoon in Panama City, Mexico beach area. Of course it did, with catastrophic effects, just 2 miles per hour shy of a Category 5 hurricane. So I read somewhere that it's the most detrimental hurricane to have hit that panhandle since the 1800s, and maybe any coastal area in the states in at least as many years. So it's left quite a trail of disaster behind it, especially for the southern Georgia area, which is mostly crops and rural areas. So you know, our cotton, our agricultural crops, those types of things took a beating. The pecans and the peaches, those types of things are on the news right now as folks are coming down from the Department of Natural Resources and the state farming industry coming to assess the farms and see the damage. Locally, you know, what did we get? Well, I can tell you that here at Mercer's campus, unfortunately, an older than 100-year-old oak fell on a student's car, unfortunately. So this was not good. This is what we woke up to the very next morning. And just north of my house, a road washed out. And so you can see that, we just couldn't handle all the rain. Even the trees were down in the area. This is what a lot of the inner city roads look like. We have a lot of pine trees in our city, and a lot of and pine trees are softwood, so they come up pretty easily and are blown over fairly easily, and just normal storms, let alone a Category 1 hurricane. So this knocks out power lines, knocks out internet, and heading into this, we know that happens a lot. The local authorities actually told everybody to get where you're going Wednesday night and stay put until at least Thursday at noon, so that local emergency crews could go out, assess damage, cut out trees from the roads, and let the power lines go. So at any rate, I just wanted to let you know that we're okay. People fared a lot worse than Macon, Georgia did. We actually did okay. Several people lost power in the area, but that's been restored. There's still a lot of folks south of us and, of course, on the coast that have extreme damage. So we want to consider supporting those and praying for those families, and just doing what you can to help in the rebuilding efforts in those areas. But I appreciate you guys being willing to come back. That shows me you're really interested and committed to this, and I'm just so pleased that you're here. So today we're going to talk a little bit about podcasts, but I thought if I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you in person, you don't really know who I am or what perspective I'm coming from, I thought I'd just introduce myself. First off, I'm a trainer. I'm a teacher, an instructional designer, a professor, and a mom. Basically, that's all those titles kind of translate into saying I'm always learning, I'm always helping others to learn, and I'm always looking for new methods to transfer content in an effective manner. Unfortunately, that kind of makes me lie awake at night sometimes thinking about how to connect all these dots. But I come up with some good ideas. Not all of them are great, but I come up with some interesting connections in the wee hours of the morning. And so I love to think about this. So if you're interested in just talking and thinking about these types of things, I'd love to have a conversation, at a summit conference or a meetup somewhere else. I'd love to really just sit and ponder some ideas with you as far as training, teaching, and development go. I know that we have a lot of people from a lot of different areas, so how many of you know what a podcast are? Is anybody new to podcasting, or maybe you're wanting to explore podcasting for your business or for your classroom? Are any of you expert podcasters, and I should just turn the reins over to you at this point? I'd love to see in the chat what your areas and backgrounds are relating to podcasting, because it helps me to understand a little bit about who's in the room and how I can tailor the presentation directly to your needs and to your areas of interest. Awesome, great. I'm a podcast consumer as well. I love listening to podcasts. I'm kind of a podcast junkie now, because I kind of don't listen to anything else in the car other than that. Oh, great, Ben, that's great. Yeah, I've seen your podcast online. This is fantastic. Congratulations on your launch. It looks to be going very successfully. Great. Well, I hope that none of you are in this last category, which is that you came to the wrong workshop and just now realized it. If you did, I hope you'll stick around. Maybe there'll be something here for you. But this is the right place to be. I'd love to have you here and have you joining us as we talk a little bit about podcasts today. Thanks for sharing too with your experience and with your background. That really helps. So by the end of the session, I just want you to see what we're going to try to accomplish here. First off, we're going to try to understand what podcasting is and why it's such a powerful content delivery tool. It's kind of outside of the lines if you think about traditional tech comm and where we've traditionally seen ourselves with manuals and writing and technical writing and editing, but I kind of want to broaden that thinking and blur those lines for you a little bit so that you can see that it actually is a really powerful content delivery tool, and one that we might ought to start thinking about more so as technical communicators. Also, we're gonna talk a little bit about what type of skills are necessary for podcasting and what kind of equipment you might need to procure if you're going to start producing a podcast. Ben's probably got a good idea and handle on that as he's launched that, so he might be able to give you some expertise as well, as he's actually been through this process relatively quick recently, so that's good. We're going to talk about how podcast content is formatted or structured, and then how podcasts create unique learning experiences, particularly in a course that I taught just recently last spring, and then how the podcasts might be used differently in different organizations, and then how specifically you as attendees can engage with podcasts. So I've got a few ideas there, and I want to throw those out for your consideration. But let's go ahead and jump in. I want to let you know that podcasting has been shown to be one of the fastest growing areas of content production today. Wow, that's a pretty powerful statement. This is not my podcast lab here. This is one over at the University of Georgia that they have. But you can see that these are just folks that are gathering together in person, and they are producing a podcast, doing some sound recording. And that's one of the reasons that it's so quick to grow, is that really, literally anybody can do it with very minimal equipment and very low setup costs. Also, it's very easy and cheap to distribute. So let's talk about this. So if you've never heard of a podcast, if you're kind of scratching your head going, well, what are we talking about? Or I've heard about these things, but I don't really know what you're talking about or how I can engage. A podcast is simply a downloadable and playable sound file. We often see them produced as a series, and they're usually produced around a specific topic for a specific audience. But then audiences can engage with that podcast over time by becoming subscribers to the whole series, or if they're just interested in sampling one episode, they can download an individual episode. Further, the idea that the content is downloadable is really unique, because if you don't have access to internet or access to the podcast itself online, you can, once it's downloadable, it's an MP3 file. It can be played back at any time and at any place, and it's portable. That's fantastic news if you have connectivity issues. And then what's really brilliant is that once you publish a podcast, those episodes remain accessible. So let's say you are 100 episodes into your podcast, and you gain a new listener on your podcast subscription. That's fabulous. Well, that podcast subscriber can now go back to episode 1 and catch up on all your great episodes. All that content from previous podcasts remains accessible. And then if you find somebody who's really enthusiastic about your work or your topic and what that specifically is doing for that audience member, they can go back and mine your past episodes and find the ones that interest them, download those, and then catch up to where you are. So that's a really unique feature of podcasts that makes it a really great way to distribute content. Maybe you've heard of several popular podcasts. They've gotten, some of them have a lot of loyal followings. Serial, for one, was a kind of an ongoing mystery saga. They got a lot of media for a while. How I Built This is a fantastic NPR produced podcast if you haven't checked it out. They put TED Talks in podcast format. This American Life is popular. Just name a genre: history, documentary, fiction, business, technology, finance, design, science, culture, lifestyle, education, foreign language. You can really learn anything you want to learn with podcasts. And for any of us that have long commutes, or if you're in the afternoon carpool line like I am, a lot of times I like to just sit and digest some podcasts and learn something new, and that keeps me going, keeps me engaged in those normally otherwise kind of stale experiences like the carpool line or the morning commute does. So I hope that maybe some of these are interesting to you, and maybe you've found some. Anybody got some favorites online? You want to chat and share some of the ones that are just your top 2 or 3 podcasts that we can tune into? I love sharing podcasts with people because new podcasts are getting launched all the time, and some of your ideas and some of your favorite podcasts have become my favorite podcasts. So one of my favorite things to do is to share with others, and I encourage you just to do this in person around you, and okay, good, and just to get some ideas from your friends and coworkers about what they're listening to. Oh, great, yeah, I've heard the Cherry Leaf podcast.
So, Jennifer, if you wanted to read the messages that are in the chat, just for the benefit of the recording, I think that would be great.
Right. So I've got several here listed up here as well. So we've got Hope for the Introvert, of course, hosted by Ben Walk. And he's already 6 episodes in, so we're excited to hear more and continue hearing more from that podcaster who's actually in our audience today. My Favorite Murder is a good one. Last Scene is about a museum heist. And then there's one called Under His Eye that was all about The Handmaid's Tale. That sounds interesting. Ellis Pratt's Cherry Leaf Tutcom podcast is a good one that I've listened to as well. Another one, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. That's a great one. I like that one as well. Bookish Stitcher is about knitting. And Aloha Mora, which is a Harry Potter analysis. I'm probably mistaking that pronunciation. Forgive me, Jamie. Somebody's also listening to season 3 of Serial right now on their commute, so great. That's one that we have on the slides here. And Eyes on Gilead was the one that we were referring to earlier. No problem. Wine for Normal People, great. And then Ben has been very generous in sharing the link to his podcast at benwalk.com. So Hope for the Introvert, yeah, lots of people are enjoying that as well. So please keep going with that, Ben. We want to hear more about Hope for the Introvert. All of us introverts out there are certainly encouraged by your work in that domain. Well, let me just encourage you just to keep sharing those as you connect with people, and as certainly folks have common interests. It's always neat to broaden our horizons and find out where people are learning and being inspired from. So today I wanted to also show you that several brands, like companies, like corporations, huge corporations, have also created successful podcasts, but they're not necessarily all about selling their materials. Oddly enough, like GE has a podcast. It's called The Message, and it's an award-winning sci-fi podcast. But what they do that's unique is they integrate their GE technology into a compelling storyline. Cool, brilliant, right? eBay has a podcast for small business owners and entrepreneurs called Open for Business. And what they try to do is share small business stories and startup lessons for others that are trying to start up their own businesses or are in the early stages of that. It's really served as an encouraging way to help small business owners learn about the day-to-day aspects of being a small business owner. Basecamp, some of you have probably used that project management software as an app. They have a podcast called The Distance, and it's a business longevity podcast where they interview business owners that have been open for 25 plus years. So this is hopefully tales of the tried and true for those who have been around for a long time, and so that can be a real encouragement to business owners as well. And then Spotify has released a podcast called Unpack, which has interviews with creatives at festivals, and it kind of circles around music, film, and tech festivals. So that's really a neat way of kind of branding them. So they've found some synergy with these different audiences, with these different topics, with their brand and the content, and they kind of bounced from that and launched it into a podcast. So don't put blinders on when you're thinking, oh, should I do a podcast? Don't limit yourself, is what I would say, to thinking, well, I just have to talk about my products, or I just have to talk about my brand. There are some really unique ways that you can spring forth from your brand and from your products or from your services and offer something that's not out there in the podcasting world, and just like these companies have done. Well, podcasting is particularly unique compared to other forms of content, and I kind of touched on this earlier. First off, it supports auditory learners. So number one, it's going to try to capture your attention. A lot of times when somebody's talking to you, you listen, and your head turns that a particular direction. Well, we tend to listen because of that human connection, and auditory learners their ears really perk up when they hear somebody talking directly to them, and that's essentially what a podcast does. It also brings personality to brands and topics. It kind of helps you dust off your old and maybe antiqued brand and maybe freshen it up a bit with a new audience type, a new generation of listeners and users. So that can be an additional personality booster for your company. It also helps to build community around podcasts. So think about it this way: if you've ever thought about your consumers as being a tribe or a community, it can really help people jump on a bandwagon and really become your cheerleaders, which then can allow you to further project into marketing actions like purchases and ongoing commitments, or even just further communication with them down the road. Now, if you've done any kind of search engine optimization in your work, you know that podcasting contributes to search engine optimization. It's all about having connectivity with our online personas, between our websites, between our social media platforms, between other media that we put out, including podcasts. So this does contribute to SEO. If you're interested in that work, here's an interesting statistic. It does capture over 67 million listeners per month, and that number is probably 6 or 8 months old now. So that number has gone up, I'm sure, significantly in that time. But that's a lot of listeners. Think about that. So if you've got that many listeners out there, there's quite a population of folks that you can be reaching with a message. Podcast also helps members and listeners retain information for the entirety of the message. Get this: when we have a podcast playing, do you know that they've done studies to see how many podcasts get listened to and to what extent? They found that 85% completion rate is what listeners have for podcasts. In other words, 85% of folks are going to complete that podcast and listen to it from beginning to end. How many of you have an 85% completion rate on that user manual you just wrote? Probably not many. I can tell you that the textbook completion rate for my undergrad students here at Mercer is not 85%, I'm afraid. So this is a great completion rate, and it gets us thinking as technical communicators, wow, is this some sort of content tool that we need to be thinking about? It does provide downloadable, portable, repeatable content like we talked about earlier, and multiple entry points for audiences. So maybe you have different folks to come in and intersect with your brand or your company with your social media. Well, they might find you on iTunes or Spotify. They may have you might sign somebody up at a conference, and then they get hooked on your podcast, which is a great thing. You might connect with somebody or a customer at a conference or some sort of tech talk, and those are great places for them to become fans of your podcast and loyal listeners. And all it takes is one topic of interest before they will download a podcast. You know, you may have different topics throughout the year, and you just find one that's interesting to you, and so you jump on. Maybe you've never come to this particular IDL SIG webinar before, for instance, and so but you saw something about podcasting, you're like, wow, this is something that I'm interested in. So you came today, you listened to the webinar, and then suddenly that spawns more curiosity for what IDL SIG is doing every month at all of their webinars. So you start coming every month, and Vicki Dill and her team are like, yes, we love having more people here. Well, it's the same thing for podcasts. You find one topic of interest, and that leads you to another podcast, and then you might discover some more content that's important to you or relatable to your experiences. Finally, again, earlier we talked about this, but it can work without an internet connection. So much right now is dependent upon internet connections. And for the most part, if you live in an urban area, you're going to be able to find internet connection on your phone without problems. But there are times when you're traveling through rural areas, some smaller towns don't have great connectivity, or if you're going to be in a location, sometimes even conference hotels have spotty internet connections. You can still download podcasts and enjoy them when you aren't connected. That's a great feature. So here's the thing, if podcasts are reaching people at these rates, maybe we should consider creating podcasts. I mean, it's amazing, it's astonishing revelation, but really, if this is kind of the future of content development and one way that we can reach users at a great achievement rate, then we ought to be looking more into it and considering it. So podcasting does require a certain skill set. First, you have to be a good writer. You need to be able to structure your content and write scripts. Podcasts thrive on some level of predictability, and I'm going to show you that format in a little bit. But you have to have some basis for that writing and a way to structure your content that makes sense. It's repeatable. It helps your readers know what to expect, and they keep coming back because it's in that same format. You have to have an ability to do some editing, both from the content side, but also from the digital side, because you're going to be editing that audio once it is done. Now, if you don't know much about editing audio, you can outsource it as well, but it's not really that difficult, and once you do a couple of them, it actually moves along quite quickly. You have to be good at organization. You also need to know who your users, your audience are, so you do a user analysis and some user-centered design, don't you, as we craft content for these users, because we know how they want to use the information. And then you need to know a little bit about public speaking and doing it well. And that's just a skill that comes with practice. I think anybody can increase their ability to publicly speak. I'm a true testament to that. I think I spoke twice from kindergarten till 10th grade in class, and then I realized that public speaking was one of my weaknesses. I was just a severe introvert, and so I did what any good 11th grader would do, who was a public speaking is fearful of public speaking. I went and enrolled in the citywide public speaking contest. You know what? And through that experience, I got a lot braver. I got a lot of great points. Won second place, I think, in the end, and eventually became a teacher. So that just goes to show you that anybody can get better, because I was at the bottom, at the pits of basically zero public speaking. And I'm not by any means perfect, but I have come a long way. Also, you need to be good helping with in interviewing folks. So if you're going to have a personality or somebody come on your podcast, we would hope that you would be able to interact with them and use some interviewing skills, like not talking over the guest speaker and things like that. That just makes sure that the content that you're sharing or that the speaker is sharing can be effectively heard by the audience members. There's all kinds of great guides online to public speaking and interviewing, and sure, that's right, improv can help you overcome public speaking fears as well. That's a great input there from the chat room. And then you just need some creativity. Have fun with it. This is a neat environment to be creative, so I hope that you engage some of that. So if we think about any of these skills, does it sound like anyone you know? Basically, it sounds exactly like a technical communicator to me. So we're in good company here. You guys are all qualified and able to develop this stuff. We just need to put some structure up to build it and put some content with it, and you'll be on your way. So let's talk about some podcasting equipment. It can be really simple, just like a MacBook. I had my first couple of podcast episodes, and I did everything in my MacBook. That was all I needed. Or it can be more complex, and you can take that MacBook and put it in a sound lab, and you can buy some extra sound editing equipment and get a really fine piece of media that you can produce. So it's kind of up to you. But at a minimum, you need a computer that has a microphone and speakers and some basic sound editing software. If you're just starting out, want to really see if you like it before you invest anything, just take your laptop. Macs have a lot of good sound and audio features. The quality of the microphones is really pretty superior to any other PC laptop that I've used. So you can just use what you've got. If you want to try some sound editing software, Audacity is free. And it's not like your Cadillac, okay? It's your basic, very bottom of the line. It's your Toyota Corolla. It gets you from here to there, and that's just fine. It's reliable, it's safe, it's easy to use. It's just where you want to be. But if you want to take it up a notch, you can yield better results. So once you get some ideas under your belt and you've got your content rolling and you've done a few episodes and you feel like this is where you want to go and you've got a good message, a good audience that you targeted, you may want to consider upgrading your computer, getting a computer that has some professional sound editing software. In our lab here at Mercer, we use Adobe Audition for our sound editing. Getting a microphone or 2 or 3 is helpful. Multiple microphones, of course, enables you to interview guest speakers and or have more than one host. So you would need a boom arm, a pop filter, which simply keeps the extra air from creating extra noise on your microphone. So it's a little screen that you put in front of your microphone between your mouth and the microphone. And then the cables to connect all of those to a soundboard. Also, noise canceling headphones help because you can hear only what other folks are saying on the line and that nothing else. So there's nothing to distract you. Having a soundboard for mixing and editing as you go live, and some room dampening materials those are also helpful. So again, a functional podcasting studio is easy to create. Here's some colleagues over at UGA, the University of Georgia, who have a podcasting studio. And you can see there's not much there. But when you want to start your process by planning your podcast, jump in by talking about your content. Try to talk about or think about, write down, outline, what's your topic going to be? What is your audience going to be? What does that audience want? Is there a particular format that works well for that audience? And then think of a podcast name. It can be a plain Jane name or something that has a double entendre or a quirky meaning and fun meanings. This is a time, again, to be creative. But think about that stuff ahead of time, because planning these topics, planning these audience members, planning the format and your podcast name, that really carries you for the entire publication of your podcast over its lifetime. So I want you to think about, when you sit down, is this a topic that will carry me for several episodes, several hundred episodes, or am I going to run out of things after the first 10 episodes? What will my audience want to hear? Are there nuances and branches off of this topic that they will want to hear? What about the format? What are other podcasts that they're listening to? And can I piggyback off of those basic formats and they will respond well to them, or they'll keep coming back for more because that particular format works well? And I mean by format, like whether you have Q&A, phone calls coming in from audience members, whether you have a guest speaker or you have somebody just talking. A podcast name is also important, as you know, because you want to be able to have it searchable. We want people to find you. So if you have something that's really vague or really broad, it can be hard to tie it to a particular content area. So having it reflective, at least, of your content or the person who's podcasting, the host, that is important. So there's a lot in a name as well. Once you've selected all those areas, then start writing. Start writing your introduction, your conclusion, and your script. If you have a team that's going to help you produce it, send that script off to your team or send it off to your guests. When they come on board and they are ready for the recording, it will help them to have an idea of where the show will be going once you launch. So I told you I'd share with you a little bit about podcast formats. So podcast formats, if it sounds like we have a lot of seasoned podcast listeners in the room, so this may be review, but a lot of times the podcast formats differ based on your content. So we saw a wide variety of podcasts represented in the room when I asked about what are you listening to lately? What do you love? But overall, we see, probably, I don't know a specific statistic, but generally most podcasts open up with an introduction, and they might have some sort of opener or some media, some music, an introduction, and then they give an agenda for the day. And then they have a main content. Now that main content can be formatted in a Q&A, a featured guest. You can live cast from an event, which means you go live at a conference or at a community event. And so you can do that in your podcast as well. And then the final conclusion is the pitch. The pitch is what you want to ask your reader to do, or what you want to try to send to your listener at the end of the show. What is it that you're trying to get them to hear or to do, the main takeaway point? And then generally we have some sort of call to action. We want them to connect with us in another way, come back for another episode next week. We want them to join our mailing list, or learn more about our book. You may have a number of actions depending on what your podcast is and who you are as a publisher, but try to give the listener some sort of call to action so that they know what they're supposed to do with the material that you just presented. And then generally there's some sort of closer, which can be the music, the outgoing music. We call it an outro. It might have some credits at the end about who is running sound or who is producing the content. At any rate, this is kind of the general map, and it can vary, so don't think that you have to only have 3 sections. I've seen some or listened to some podcasts that have both kind of a main lecture where the host presents some sort of content. Maybe lecture is letting my scholastic background shine through, but it's the host presenting some information, and then they go to a Q&A where some callers will call in and they'll answer questions live, and then they'll have a featured guest at the end. So I've seen any number of formats for this. It doesn't mean that you can only have one. Be creative. Let it function for your audience and for your content. And then finally, you want to try to integrate some media to enhance your podcast. It's fine if you're just getting started to just speak and let your voice be the, so to speak, face of your podcast for a while. But as you grow and as you become more comfortable with podcasting, look into music or sound effects, some cover art that you can use as you publish your podcast to any of the podcast directories that are out there. These types of media just give your podcast a more polished look and feel. It also makes you more recognizable. So if I have downloaded 8 or 10 podcasts from different organizations, once I hear that intro music, I can usually tell which podcast I'm listening to before anybody's even spoken. So it kind of gives an identity to my podcast listening as an audience member. And likewise, when I'm searching, the cover art reminds me what I'm looking for. I know what the what the Cherry Leaf podcast looks like because I've looked for it a number of times. I know what different podcasts look like because of the cover art. They become recognizable to me. So realize that you're building a persona in your podcast with your listeners by the media that you integrate. And the final thing that you want to do after you've integrated some media is publish your podcast so that you can reach your audience. So typically, if you're not familiar with this is all new to you. When you publish a podcast, the very basic, you need a website and you need a media host. Now, there are so many media hosts that are out there. Here are just a few that I've listed. I've had some experience trying to integrate media and uploading it to my WordPress site, but when I've read some reviews about the long-term reliability of that, I decided that that wasn't a good way to do it, so I took everything down. What happens is WordPress doesn't like to get a whole lot of traffic downloading and uploading files to any one website. It can be a free service if you use their WordPress in its WordPress.org format, and so that's good. But then they can start limiting your download and upload speeds, or cap your data content. So it really is best to publish with a host. And you can get some really good deals with different codes and things that are out there on the internet. So I would just search, if you're interested in uploading to Blueberry, then for instance, look for Blueberry codes that would take you down to some really cheap initiation fees, and that makes it, the monthly fees or initiation fees or whatever you have to pay, a lot more manageable, especially if you're just starting out, you've got a small business, or you're not really sure how much effort and money you want to put into this venture quite yet. You can also publish to directories. A lot of you find your podcast through iTunes, through Spotify, or even an RSS feed. So make sure that you do publish to a directory. And a lot of times when you use the widgets and the wizards that are built into Podbean or Blueberry or whatever media host you're using, it'll ask you, do you want to list in these directories? And you say, yes, absolutely. More ways to be found by my audience? Absolutely, you want to find new audience members that way. You want audience members to find you. So absolutely list yourself whenever you get the opportunity. So I want to share with you a specific way that I've used podcasting recently. Last spring at Mercer, we offered TechCom 485, which is our social media management class. Students learn about writing for social media. They learn strategies for social media engagement with audiences and clients. They learn about how to manage communication strategies across multiple platforms in the social media world. We do conduct audience assessment with regards to these projects, and we then create the actual social media. So throughout the semester, they were creating podcasts, but they were also creating blogs, microblogs, and that's just Twitter and Instagram, really short snippets of information, and also website copy to speak the content to these audiences that they had assessed for specific clients. And so this is a picture of our small, humble, but really powerful podcasting studio, and the groups did a great job publishing podcasts. We had 4 groups, and they each published 8 podcasts over the semester. So we had 32 podcasts come out of this one podcasting studio after the midterm. So I was really pretty pleased with how things turned out. Well, our students set up this new sound lab. We got a grant, as you read on the last slide, which we were so thankful for the Research That Reaches Out office at Mercer's campus here in Macon. And so we were able to purchase some new equipment to enhance what we already had. We already had a Mac with Adobe Audition, so we didn't have to get any computer equipment or editing software, but we did need some microphones with pop filters. We got a couple of really nice noise-canceling headsets, a very small soundboard, and then a velvet backdrop that we use as a sound barrier that really helped to cut down on the echoes in the room. It doesn't have to be a really expensive velvet backdrop. That's just one that seems to absorb sound really well in that room, and it made a world of difference. So it doesn't have to be expensive when you're purchasing these things, but the better quality, of course, gives you some better results in some cases. So then our students were assigned clients who had expressed interest in a social media overhaul and web presence overhaul. So the students assessed their real client needs. They conducted interviews with the clients. They looked at their current audience needs, and then they completed a social media audit. And what that really means is they went out and looked on the web at every place where each of the clients was present, and then they wrote a report about what kind of information was being transmitted in that area of presence, what audience needs were being met, what were the actions that they were trying to drive their audiences to, and what was already being done, and then where were the gaps? What did the client really want, and where were those coming up short in the current web presence? Then, with that information, they went and proposed a new social media plan for their clients. Now, I'm talking about a whole social media plan. I'm not talking about just podcasting, but they gave a social media plan to them, a report that said, hey, this is your background and context. You're going to be launching this new program. You're going to be recruiting new users or new audience members for this program. Whatever it was, whatever the context of the client situation, they outlined that. They gave the results of the social media audit. They analyzed their audience members and told them what they found, and then they crafted a unique, customized social media strategy for that client and gave them a social media calendar, which is really where you lay out all the media on all of your social platforms, from podcasting to your blog, your website, to Facebook, to Instagram, to Twitter, and then laid out all of the content and developed that content in light of that calendar. So if they said we have a Twitter post going out every day, and then on Thursdays there's a Facebook post, and on Fridays we have a blog post, that was not only mapped out in the calendar, but then they developed it as part of the project. And so here's one of the students interviewing one of our clients for a program that they had, and that turned out to be a really fun episode. In the end, why do we use podcasts, and what do we get out of it? The students gained extra skills and experience in audience analyses. They learned communication strategies. They did some research and planning, and then they learned some practical hands-on skills with audio, hardware, and software use. Here's the unique thing for a learning environment. If you're a teacher or if you're in education, when you do podcasting, students encounter the content that they're podcasting about multiple times. First off in the audience analysis, then when they're doing that follow-on research, when they're planning, recording, editing, and playback. Wow, what a lot of ways to contact and interact with the content. So that's really beneficial from a learning standpoint. It could serve lots of different types of courses. Here's some examples. Have a group podcast, a textbook chapter, do a social issue, promote a community event, communicate what types of research projects are going on at the university, or find a client and a host organization that you can situate your podcast or social media into. Some of our outcomes were were here, and they're very positive. 11 out of 13 students cited podcasting. Out of all the media that they developed, podcasting was their favorite. So I felt that was pretty exciting. They said they improved their interviewing skills, which I was thrilled with from a communication standpoint. They reflected on the importance of relaxing, remaining conversational, vocal inflection. These are just basic speech concepts, but you know what? It's very hard to teach some of that. So having them throw it into a podcasting format, let them play it back and hear what they needed to work on, analyze that, and then fix it for the future. They learned about planning from a scheduling, planning, and coordination perspective, and they learned how to work with new hardware like the sound equipment and software that they may not have been exposed to in the past. They were also creative, and then they found that work interesting. A lot of them said this is a lot more time consuming than we ever thought. And I said, yes, it is. And so they learned some time management goals and time management ideas that will probably serve them well as they graduate and move into their organizations for full-time employment. But they also had an increased interest in engaging with podcasts in the future. So that, to me, that says they're interested in the media. They want to either publish it or at least listen to it. So they're interested in self-development, or they're interested in podcasting as a form of entertainment. And that's great. And a couple of them even said, hey, I'm kind of interested in this as a career. I love this quote that somebody wrote on their survey. I'm interested in becoming more transparent within writing and having a better ability of expressing thoughts. Podcasts were interesting and a step outside of my comfort zone. However, after doing so, I became more interested in developing better content. I love that. So what? What's the takeaway? Well, you can engage with podcasts wherever you are. Assign a podcast assignment to your students if you're an instructor or a professor. Start with your own corporate branded podcast if you're in industry. Host a personal podcast about a special area of interest or a hobby. Seek out podcasts where you can promote your own work or your own products. Share a side hustle that you're engaging with right now. Share your expertise with podcast audiences in your profession. A lot of you have expertise that even though we're all technical communicators, we may not be able to expressly be experts in every single skill set. So I'd love to learn from you. Sponsor a podcast or an episode series, or guest host a podcast episode on a relevant topic. You can also be a listener and just call in to a Q&A session. And finally, just listen to podcasts. Find out what's in there. Learn something new. Jump in and encounter the unknown. It's really exciting and something worth spending your time on. So, and in conclusion, I just want to point out that podcasting, I hope you've seen, it offers a unique opportunity for students and organizations alike. If you want to set it up with students, it can be a really great learning experience. But it can also be great for organizations who want to build their brand, build their community, expand their brand recognitions, and just share content with their users. I've got a couple of resources up there. The podcast host is a great resource for starting a podcast if you've never done this before and you want to kind of get your feet wet. Super helpful articles out there on that website. And then also we're going to be launching a social media course next summer 2019. It's a 10-week graduate level social media management course in our Masters of Science in Tech Com program, which is where we have our graduate certificate program and our master's program. So if you're interested in learning more about that or taking that course, reach out to me or check in at our website. I'd love to have you on board for that learning experience. And with that, I would just want to turn it over to you, the audience members in the chat room. What questions do you have? Jump on the mic, type in your questions on the chat. How can I help you engage in this content or realize some more of your curiosities as you've heard about these ways of connecting with podcasts?
And you guys, you all have microphone rights, so all you have to do is unmute and speak right up. Or if you're shy, you can just type to us into the chat window. So, Jennifer, this is Vicki, and I'm a little bit surprised at how scripted podcasts are. When I listen to them, they sound so breezy and informal. They, like Leatte's point about improv improves your public speaking. They really sound improvised. So, is your script really specific, or is it kind of general?
I think that's a great question. So not every podcast is scripted. I see that Ben's saying his isn't that scripted. And I don't say scripted like when you have a Q&A session or a special guest coming to join you, that you script all of your answers. But if you have a guest, it's really helpful for you to send your questions to them in advance. And that's just a basic interviewing technique that we use in any discipline, not just podcasting. But having a plan, having a game plan for your podcast is what I mean by a script. And so for some that might be a written out script, why this is everything that we're going to cover, or these are our interview questions, or it just might be an outline of this is what we're going to follow and the topics that we're going to cover. Some of them are more conversational and it kind of is more organic as it evolves during the podcast, and that's totally fine. That fits the nuance and the character of that podcast. But what I want to challenge you to do, and challenge anybody who's in this to think about, is that if you set a goal for yourself and you write that goal down, you're more likely to achieve it. So, goal setting strategies have been proven time and again. Well, what I'm saying with a script is that's basically your goal for your podcast episode. So it keeps us on target, it tells us where we're heading, and it reminds us that we want to have that call to action or that pitch at the end that we may forget about when we're caught up in the moment of our exciting topic. So the script is a script used in loose terms.
Right.
And I would just encourage you to stay in character with your podcast.
And Marianne has posted into the chat the same question I was going to follow up with. So it's more like a storyboard.
Yeah, a storyboard or an outline. Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to find that, like I said, stay in character with your podcast. If it's a more open conversational one, absolutely keep it as such, but just have that outline, have that plan for what you're going to accomplish. I've heard it said that if you set out and you don't know where you're going, you'll get there 100%. So this is one of those things where you just don't want to just jump into the driver's seat and just press record and go forth. do a little bit of planning, and everything will come out a lot better quality at the end. So somebody's asked, Ben, do you have a tip to share as far as the one thing you wish you'd known when you created your first episode? Ooh, great.
Ha 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 ha. Wow. I feel like I'm still so early on the learning curve with it. I didn't plan on podcasting at all. I had a friend that somebody I met at one of the conferences, and we set up some follow-up conversation, and we're talking about really how to have a larger influence in terms of talking about introverted leadership. And she recommended the podcasting thing. I wasn't even on my radar, and jokingly, said you should be podcasting so that introverts have hope. And it's like, well, actually, it's a cheesy title, but it's a pretty good title. So that's why we went with the hope for the introvert for the podcast title. It's been really interesting because there is a lot of ramp up, and the whole intro, outro, and making sure you have that in place. And that part is absolutely pre-recorded and put in. Picking music, I'm going to post a link in here where I found my music. What's interesting is that having gone to this melodyloops.com and looking at the music, I know I should turn on my I'll turn on my camera too.
Yeah, we all have camera rights, and just a reassurance that the camera is not recorded in the won't be on YouTube. So
yeah, so anyway, so I had Mohs surgery on Monday, so that's why I have this Band-Aid, and I have this nice stitch line which you can't really see, and I'm not going to zoom in on. But it was interesting because it was not on my radar. I had not planned to do it. I used this melodyloops.com for the music. After having listened to many of the clips, I start hearing them on commercials and other places, so it's kind of funny in terms of that, and that was fairly inexpensive. The interesting thing is I had a framework going into it because of an Intercom article I had published in May, June on being a leader as a leader as an introvert in the workplace. So I use that as the framework for the current series we're working through, which could take a couple of years to work through, quite honestly. And so I have like a set of questions that I send to people because they're much more comfortable if they have some idea of what we're going to talk about. But also, we always diverge from it because something comes up during the conversation that's interesting, and of course, we end up pursuing it. What's funny going in as an introvert, the idea of podcasting was absolutely, you've got to be kidding. I'm not just going to sit there and talk. But having conversations with other people has been an amazing way to do this, and it's been great. And I think, I've got 4 episodes which are kind of in pre-production now, but the things that I'm getting out of the podcast just from having the conversations and some of the things that people are sharing are really, really important. And I'm finding it's making a difference in terms of how I approach things and how, other people are approaching things as well. And some of the stuff is just funny. The next one I'm releasing was an interview of Kirk St. Amant and talking about his presentation and his presentation style. And he told me, he says, do you see that I take off my glasses when I present? And I hadn't noticed that. And he said he has this terrible fear of standing in front of people and talking. And he takes his glasses off so that he cannot see their faces.
Wow.
And I thought it was hysterical because he's a great presenter. But it was just funny when you start hearing these little things, and I think, it humanizes us. And I think especially as we become leaders, people make these huge assumptions about how you've always been that way. Jennifer, you mentioned having spoken maybe twice through 10th grade. I avoided any kind of speaking opportunity like the plague. I didn't want anything to do with it, but now I've gotten used to it. But what I would say is I found putting the podcasting together to be a lot of fun. I'm using Adobe Audition also because we have a campus license for it. So I'm using that, and it does have some built-in tools, but it is challenging because you can't control the audio for your guest. And
Mm.
you learn quickly that you can only polish things so well if you don't have good audio to start with. So learning to do some of the editing has been a challenge, but I've enjoyed doing it. It's very time consuming. But I'm having a great time doing it, and my blog was pretty much stale in terms of, communications and getting readers, and I've done some articles, but they've all been internal house publications like Intercom. And what's happened now that I used Blueberry as a host, and that changed the first day of my podcast, where I was originally going to put it on Amazon Web Services and manage it myself, and then panicked as I realized, wait, I'm getting listeners. And I wanted to get it onto a podcasting host so I didn't have to worry about it. But I'm somewhere, I didn't get my stats right the first couple of days, but over the 6 episodes that are out there now, we're somewhere around 420 downloads, I think, which is just awesome. And they're primarily, yes, it seems like I have my fan club here on the podcast, but it's primarily people I've never connected with. So it's been really, really great. So I highly recommend it. It did take a good amount of planning and scripting, in the sense that you really need to have an objective of what you're trying to do, but it's awesome. I really enjoy it. I really appreciate the presentation too. And you and I will have to chat some more for sure.
That'd be great. Well, yeah, thanks for those pointers. I think those are really very key insights to your own podcast, and I love how it's growing, and you've already got quite an audience, so that's fantastic. 6 episodes in, I think that's fantastic and something to be certainly proud of. Somebody asked, do we have a guideline for how long it takes to edit an episode? It really depends on the length of your episode. I hate to give an honest answer that sounds like I'm kind of backing out of it. It depends. How long is your episode? How many portions do you have? How many segments do you have? How many speakers do you have? How complex is the media that you're building in with sound effects and extra music? So even the simplest can take you a long time if you don't know your own, if your expertise isn't great in the editing software. So as you get the hang of it and you kind of get those certain skill sets nailed down and the media factored in, like Ben was talking about, once you have your intro and outro done, you just drop those in at the beginning and end of every file. You don't have to recreate the wheel every time. So that becomes faster, and I've just found that over time it can shrink down considerably as you kind of get in a rhythm of editing. Again, if that's not your cup of tea, there's people who do this for a living. You can outsource it.
Yeah, it depends on how many knows the guest uses and and things like that you end up editing out also. So
True.
It sounds much better polished than it does when you're recording. So.
Are you able to count listeners who don't download? It depends on which tracking system you're using and which counter you're using. Different platforms like iTunes and Spotify use different metrics, so it just kind of depends on which one you're using.
So I'm trying to keep up with all of the links that you guys are. I'm going to put them in the email that's going to go out to all the attendees and the people that signed up just to view by recording. So looks like Ben just gave me another link here.
Oh, and I will point out, I didn't mention this, but at the end of a podcast, you can have notes section. Most likely, a lot like you have at YouTube. You have the description section at the bottom. And a lot of people share links or resources or books that they mention in their podcasts in the links below in the notes section. So it's another way to gain traction for other media sites that you might have, other brands or products that you're trying to link to. So that's just another way of building that interconnectivity among your social media presence.
Yeah, and one other thing I would add, I had an existing WordPress.org blog, so I could just leverage that. And Blueberry's got this great little plugin, which you don't have to use with Blueberry. You can just use it, which automatically helps you publish things out from the podcast. But I decided early on that I also wanted to use have a furnish a transcript for each blog because I recognize that not everybody wants to consume it through a podcast. So on my website, at least, I have full transcripts, and that I'm using a service called temi.com, which is like 10 cents per word, which comes out fairly inexpensively, and it's the fastest way I've found to do that so far. Still a lot of editing to do, but it's a good start.
I love that. Yeah, accessibility should be huge to all of us technical communicators. So I love that you're making your content accessible in lots of formats.
Hi all, this is Mary Ann Bowen, and I am not turning on my camera. Not today. Good session. If anybody said this and I missed it, I apologize. Do you have a source? Did somebody mention a source for music that you wouldn't have to worry about royalties? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Melody Loops is the one that we had that Ben
I mentioned. Yeah.
And then there are some. I mean, you can just Google it, and there are all kinds of resources available in directories. So
okay,
they're easy to find.
Yeah, and Melody Loops wasn't free, but it was. I think it was $20 or $30 for 3 different downloads, and I've only used one so far, and it's a perpetual license on it, so it takes care of all of that.
Thanks. Yeah, although I'm probably not likely to be doing this anytime soon. I was thinking about it as an additional training tool in a different way, to transmit technical training and feel that my users need, but I think I need to stick to webcasts on that because I can't think of a situation where I could describe something without being able to show it. So,
but this would be a great way to do some of the annual training. I mean, what a great format. People could download it and listen to the training in the car during the commute. Just a really neat way for us to think about how we connect with our audiences in ways that we've not thought about before. So keep it in the back of your mind. It's just an option. It's not a single magical arrow that's going to fix all your problems. But I think it's helpful. I've used Canva for a quick and easy graphic cover. If anybody's used Canva, that's free and easy to use. To your question, Liat, and then also I was trying to keep everything for my students free, and so a lot of these resources that we've been sharing, if you can get at a free cost or at a very simple version. So if you are implementing it, you just want to try it on for size, or you have an educational audience that you're trying to keep costs down for, there are ways to get around podcast publishing at a very cheap or no cost barrier to entry.
Yeah, I can certainly see, the production of a podcast being a really good training tool. As a vehicle for delivering training, I guess there are times, I guess there are some topics, that are more conceptual that it might be good to have the recording of that people can just listen to without having to be somewhere where they can watch a screen. And then have that as a companion to the webcast versions. Anyway, thank you very much for this.
Oh,
and
thanks
I haven't had a chance yet to listen to any of the Hope for the Introvert podcasts, but that is great too. And I've mentioned it to a couple of people that I've been having discussions with on introverted leadership. So I'm looking forward to that.
I just subscribed to you. So right now, downloading into my iPhone are 6 podcast sessions.
Awesome. I think your subscriber list just went up.
All right, we are at a little bit over an hour, so I realize that you may want to continue to hang out and chat with Jennifer and maybe Ben and maybe me, but I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, and that way it can start processing and get me a little farther down